3, 2.
Welcome to Northern BC Narrative on Location. Today, I have with me an amazing human being and a doctor by name of Dr. Tracey. Dr. Tracey, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for taking your time. I know how busy you are and coming and doing an interview with us. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you for having me here.
Wow, it's always a pleasure.
Yeah. So I'm Dr. Tracey Lotze, born and raised in South Africa, did my medical degree in South Africa, and then after a childhood dream. Childhood dream. So since I was 6, I wanted to be a doctor and live in Canada.
Yeah.
So once I got into med school, then I just figured out how I can move to Canada.
Yeah. So okay, let's go back. So childhood dream.
Childhood dream.
Let's talk about that. Like, how did that happen? Like when you were a child, you wanted to be a doctor?
That's all I can ever remember is that I wanted to be a doctor. And you can ask my family, anyone who knew me back then, that's all I ever spoke about. And even in South Africa, it works differently. We can actually get into medical school right from high school if you have the right grades and if you have the right kind of the credits and the scores that they're looking for. And initially, I didn't get an early acceptance. And, you know, I was devastated. I thought there's nothing else I can imagine doing except being a doctor. And it was the longest waiting period and the only time I was ever unsure about where my life would go was this kind of 11 months waiting to hear then if I'd got into med school.
Doctor, I'm going to take you back to your childhood. Talk about your childhood a little bit. Like, what was some of the influence that you wanted to be a doctor? And talk about some of the dreams you have, because as children, you're very visual, right?
Yes.
So talk about some of that.
So it's interesting. Nobody in my family had been to university. My parents hadn't graduated high school. Yeah. My mom worked in the security industry. My dad worked for the post office.
Oh wow!
So I didn't really have any medical influences. Unfortunately, my grandparents and that were passed away when I was quite young. So it was an isolated dream that I don't know where it came from. It was just something. It's all I ever knew. Yeah. I graduated 18 years ago, and I still love every single day on the job.
So talk about. I'm going to take it back to childhood. So, were there any influences in your life when you were a child that you wanted to be a doctor, or was it just like that? You just knew you wanted to be a doctor.
It was just there. It was just this thing inside me that said, "That's what you're going to be, and that's what you need to be." So,
what kind of visions did you have when you were a child to be a doctor? Like, what kind of imagination did you have? Would you play the doctor?
I did. So it was very. For those who would remember, it was very Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman. I don't know if anyone still remembers that show. Was it Seymour? Somebody Seymour. She was an actress in the time, and it was basically a woman who was living in the back in the earlier days, playing Medicine Woman. So that's the dream that I saw in my head, watching that show. Yeah.
So would you reenact it? Would you reenact that or?
As I got older, the dream evolved, and I always thought to myself that if I wasn't settled in medicine at some point, probably in my 40s, what I would do is take it, instead of envisioning it in kind of Canada or North America, I would have taken it back to Africa and probably opened up a clinic somewhere in a community, in a smaller community, living in a hut, just helping the people in there, in the communities,
So you had to study really hard, right?
Yes.
So so you knew what you wanted.
I knew what I wanted.
You wanted that dream.
I worked on it. I managed to get in.
Okay, so before you get in, what did you have to do to get in? Because I'm pretty sure you have to take all these crazy science classes, right? This is the most difficult things, right? So talk about that a little bit.
The schooling in South Africa is very different to North America, very different to Canada. So it was very disciplined. I didn't have a choice. I mean, I could choose, I guess, between history and geography and science, but the schooling is so much stricter and more structured that I automatically ended up in that route, because you had to take those subjects no matter what. Okay. You could take them higher grade or lower grade, but schooling was easy for me. I enjoyed going to school.
Oh, serious?
I don't remember doing homework very often. I liked it. It came naturally to me. Even once I got to university, I had 2 businesses of my own while I was in med school, worked a 3rd job. Schooling felt comfortable and easy.
Okay, so before going to med school, right? So what do you have to do? Okay, I guess it was so easy for you to do everything,
you had to have certain. I mean, I didn't get like magical grades. I didn't get 100%, but I got 80s to 90s. And you had to have X amount of points for your subjects. We also had to have a number of community points.
Yeah.
So I would volunteer at the hospital. I also was a national level kickboxing champion.
Kickboxing. Oh.
So
it gets better.
So I went to Europe and competed there. So for your sport, you get a certain number of points for your social commitment, and then with those points, you apply to med school.
So, doctor, you said the schooling is different there. How strict is it?
It's very structured.
You did, like,
You do all of it. We did when we were in junior school. We did, the canes came out, and I mean, my school was so strict. We had regulation like hair bands, regulation socks, regulation shoes. We were only allowed certain like uniform, everything. You know, in our school, even the girls were not allowed to go to the boys' half of the school.
Oh, wow.
The boys were only allowed to come to the girls' half, and then the staff room would oversee that so that nobody could be getting up to mischief. It was quite strict.
Did anybody try it, and what happened? Have you heard stories?
You know what? We just didn't. You just didn't, because you didn't. Back in those days, we got expelled, and if you got expelled, where did you go? Right? It's a big shame, and our school was very well known, even though we were actually just a community school. We were very well known for our academics. So we ended up with multiple students most years in the top of the country.
Oh, wow.
So the guy who was top of my class actually came, I think, 16th in the entire country. So this is a country with currently almost 50 million people. In a country that's smaller than the province of British Columbia that we're in.
50 million.
50 million people. So when you're competing, and you look at everybody in the whole country who did grade 12, he came like 16th in the country. So that's how much the academics.
Genius.
Yeah.
So, Doc, how was life there? How is life different from there to Canada? I'm always interested in different cultures.
Very
because
different.
So let's talk about it.
So, I grew up during apartheid. So, and
what is that?
So apartheid was when the white government from South Africa, which was very much a Dutch influence, came in. They segregated the black population from the white population. They put the black population in townships. They took away a lot of their rights. If you were mixed race, which we call colored, so those were often people who may have had one white parent and one black parent, you were shunned. You didn't have any place to belong. The white people got given, all of the privilege. The black people were made the workers, the maids, the gardeners, the cleaners. They had a lot of difficulty being able to kind of excel. And so that was for the first 14 years of my life. The culture was still like that. And then in 1994, when Nelson Mandela was freed, that culture kind of slowly broke up. And it was a big change for South Africa. And it's interesting times to be growing up as a teenager, yes.
So you saw both of the sides.
I did. I mean, I can remember going, when I was in junior school, what we call junior school, primary school, I think I had one non-white boy in my class, and I remember it. He was a lovely guy. His name was Dean, and we went to school. We eventually went to high school together. But by the time I went to high school, then we had maybe 2 or 3 people. But this was still very, very minimal, right? It was still kind of like they were the token non-white people in the school, because the community were all kept very white or black. You were segregated quite a lot.
So did this influence you in any way, shape, or form? Because I know you're a very nice person. You're open to everybody, and then you're fair to everybody. Did this influence your...
I want to say no, and the only reason I can say that is when we graduate grade 7 and where we go from primary school to high school, our tradition it was always like you have a book and you get all your friends to write in it, and you stick photos and stuff. And interestingly, Dean made a thank you in there to say that I'd been very kind and generous and always treated him well. So I knew I had treated him well without having to think about it. I also grew up with what you would call a maid. So in South Africa, it's almost like a career path for many ladies, often who are not white, and they'll be our maid, and they'll come to the house every day. They clean your house, they do your ironing, your washing. They'd be there when you get home from school. So I'd grown up with a maid, Alida, and she's just in her 70s now, and I actually eventually brought her to Canada and
you
showed
said you
her
brought her to Canada?
where I live
Oh my
here.
God, that's
Yes,
beautiful.
about 3 years ago,
Yeah.
just before COVID.
Yeah.
And she becomes like a second parent to you,
Yeah.
although they're not allowed to be. And I do remember growing up that she had her own plate and her own knife and fork and her own coffee mug that she used to use. She wasn't allowed to use ours. And, she would use the washroom, but we would never see her use the washroom when we were there because she wasn't really allowed to.
Yeah.
And in many houses, you would have a separate washroom for that person to be using, so they weren't using your washroom.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of rules. We were not really allowed to hug and kiss her because that's inappropriate because they're not white. So it's very different. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
There's a lot of cultures that stuff like that, right? But now, thank God, everything is kind of like gone, right? So we can all be equal again. But there's still a lot of problems.
There is a lot of problems, yes, and I guess it also comes down to individual people, right? Like I never really saw them as other people.
Yeah.
Maybe I was too young, so for me it was just people are people.
Yeah.
Alida was just there. She's your person at home. Dean was just another kid in my school. But for many others, it isn't necessarily that easy because they've also been taught by their parents, by society, by their culture.
Right.
They've been brainwashed to believe certain things, and it's harder, I guess, when you've grown up like that with only one side.
I tell you something. I think we're not trained to be like that. But there are people that kind of make us like this so we can always be divided.
Yeah.
So we don't unite. Because power is in unity.
Yes.
Right? And then the more separate we are, the weaker we become.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's only one race on this planet, and that's a human race.
Yeah.
Right? But
we all came from the same place
same
at some
place.
point.
We're going to the same place.
And we're all going to go to the same place one day. Yes.
And nothing is ours, right?
Exactly.
Nothing is ours.
Yeah.
So, Doc, how was your experience in the medical school? And then also, let's talk about the kickboxing. Is it okay? Am I too close? Should I be farther?
No. So I started kickboxing probably when I was 8 or 9 or 10, somewhere there.
8 or 9? I thought you were going to say 18. 8 or 9?
No, 8 or 9. And then, in those days, you used to train in someone's kind of garage. You would go into the garage in their yard, and there'd be a bunch of us training there. And over time, obviously, the kickboxing school became very big. But that's where we started, just at the neighborhood, in the backyard of some guy. I do remember that my coach, however, was at that point already a 6th Dan, and he would go grade in Japan because you couldn't grade 6th Dan black belt, and you couldn't grade in South Africa for that level.
That is really high.
Yeah, he was. At this point, if I'm not mistaken, he's now 9th Dan. Yeah.
9th Dan?
Yeah.
Doctor.
So he was a pretty good guy. Yeah. You didn't want to get stuck in a corner with him.
No, I don't want to be stuck in here right now. So Doc, let's talk about the training. How was it? Like, why did you want to do martial arts actually? Right? Because you had a dream to be a doctor. Mm-hmm. But then how did martial art happen here?
Well, at that point, my father did martial arts. So he kind of signed my sister and myself up as well. Yeah. He did it as well. And at one point, all 3 of us represented South Africa, and my brother was in the provincial team. So my mom's still got this photo. I've still got it where we're all wearing our national blazers, representing the country together. Yeah. So it was just something my dad did it. I love, anything my dad was doing. So I was happy to hang out and spend time with him here.
Let's talk about your dad a little bit. Mm-hmm. The type of influence he had on you, and then what kind of a person was he?
Yeah. So to give some background, my dad grew up quite poor. He told us this story about how, on Thursdays they'd run out of food. You'd be hungry Thursday night. You'd have to go to school with a hungry belly. And then on Friday at noon, his dad would get his weekly wage and they'd be able to eat again. Yeah. How his father would send him to what he called the poor kids camp so that he could get a free t-shirt and a free kind of pair of shorts and sweatshirt and things like that. So he grew up struggling. His parents divorced when he was quite young, and his mom moved to Australia. Yeah. So it was just him and his dad for a long time. And so he's grown up with struggle. He worked. He planned his money well. So we never struggled. I mean, I never grew up wealthy, but I never needed for anything. Right. So he was able to make sure that we had a secure childhood by making all the right decisions. Yeah. Out of his own struggles from his own youth.
What were some of the influences from your father?
More of the influences?
Some of them. What are some of the influences? What are some of the things that your father influenced you?
My father's interesting because he definitely doesn't let anybody tell him anything, which is probably a bad habit to pick up.
Yeah.
But he was also very much a family man. So he always felt, because he didn't grow up with a lot of family, that our house was always the hive where everybody could come to. The door was always open. You know, there'd always be some beers or anything if you wanted to drink. The fire was always going. We used wood fire in South Africa, so the fire would be lit at any point. But also quite extravagant when we were younger. So he liked to do things with a bang. He always liked to drive a nice car, although we couldn't afford like very expensive cars, but he'd find them, you know, a good refurbished car. Or when we'd make the fire, instead of just lighting a fire like a normal person would, where you'd put the wood and, you know, start with a Kindle, he'd pour petrol on it and light it like that, and like the windows would bang. And he was just, his personality was large, but it was very loving as well. Yeah.
Oh, that is
and
amazing.
He loves to tell stories.
Your dad.
He makes up, I mean, most of them we're going to assume are at least partially fictional, but he makes up the best stories and can keep you entertained for hours. Yeah.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
So what about your mom?
Yes. So my mom, very hard worker. So it's probably where I got my work ethic. I mean, my dad worked hard, but he was okay with my mom being the breadwinner. My mom eventually kind of made a bigger salary and was even his boss at one point. She worked herself up in the security industry, eventually, first starting kind of just in the office, and eventually became the #1 female in security in South Africa.
Wow.
And was headhunted by multiple companies to run their security division. So I do remember as a child growing up in my mom's company, they used to do wages, old school wages, where you packed each person's wage in an envelope and had their name on, they'd get given it. So my first job at age 12 was in a warehouse, like stapling packages of wage money in a production line. Everybody still smoking in the warehouse.
Are you serious?
No windows. We're like underground, just a bunch of us ladies, you know, every day. That was my first job, my first summer job.
That is beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, in those cultures, they put you to work early, right?
Well, and it was lovely. It was a summer job. It was just the 3 weeks. Our summer is over the Christmas season. So it's the 3 weeks before the Christmas season. The factories all shut down. Everybody gets their bonuses. So we had to have that ready. So school closes usually about the 6th of December. So 3 weeks for me to kind of help make a little bit of money. I remember my first paycheck was 300 Rand.
What is that?
Which is the currency, which you have to divide by 12 right now to get Canadian dollars. So not a lot.
No.
But it was more than enough for a 12-year-old, you know. 30 years ago. I had to do the math there for a second.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So, Doc, so you had really good influences, right?
Yes.
You basically come from a family of winners, right?
Yes.
You know, hard workers
Yes.
and whatnot, right? So now let's talk about, so you were rejected first at a med school, right?
Well, I didn't get an early acceptance, so I had to go on the wait list. So in South Africa, you can apply, and obviously your top students, there's a small elite group of very top students, very wealthy students, right? And some that will get bursaries and things like that. So they might get what we get, an early acceptance. So they'll know at the start of grade 12 already that as long as they maintain their grades and everything they presented with, that they're already in. The rest of us have to wait till the end of grade 12 and wait on the wait list.
How was that meeting? How would you feel?
It was excruciating. It was excruciating. So initially the universities don't all start at the same time. So because I was on the wait list at 2 universities, I had to pick one to start, because if I didn't get in, I had to do something else. So I started at one university and I'd been there about 3 weeks, and then the other university that I'd applied to called me to say I had a spot. Packed up my bags, moved towns, went back home and started med school there. So I hadn't, the schools had started about a month apart,
So how was some of the first experiences in med school? Were you like, oh my God, I'm doing my dream, like, oh, life is great. What were some of the thoughts in your mind when you first started?
It wasn't always like I'm living this dream. It was just, this is who I am. Like, this is where I'm supposed to be. So it didn't feel like work.
But were you excited when you got in?
Of course.
So what was
very excited. But other than that, it was just, it wasn't even an excitement as much as it was now I'm not wasting time doing something else.
Oh, okay.
Right. Okay. I didn't want to waste a year having to start something and then reapply if I didn't get in. So it was just like, okay, now I can just get down to what I need to be doing right away.
Yeah.
At the time, I also had started up 2 companies and was working a 3rd job. So it was all just very much part of life.
So what are the companies you started? Like, usually, you don't have time in school, right? You're just getting hammered everywhere, right?
Yeah,
How did you start to business? I know students in university, everyone's struggling, everyone's crying. The assignment is coming up. People are like, oh,
I never felt like that. It was weird. I never felt like that.
Yeah.
So eventually I had 2 promotional companies and 25 staff members working for me by the end of med school.
25 staff?
25 staff. When I graduated med school, I actually thought to myself, I remember that being more significant because I remember thinking, I guess I have to be a doctor now. Like I'm going to have to close these companies down because I can't really do everything. That seems wrong.
What were the companies you started and how did you start them?
So I started by working for I was working for somebody else doing promotions.
Yeah.
And at one point she said, look, she's going to be moving. She's starting up her own thing. Do I want to take over the company? Yeah. And I said, yes, please. And I took it over from her. And we had clients like L'Oreal, Beacon Candy, all of the regional sports teams, those kind of things. And then out of that, I managed to meet somebody who introduced me to somebody else, and I ended up running the provincial division of Budweiser for South Africa.
Budweiser?
Budweiser.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So I ran a kind of team of 8 girls who were the Bud girls, but we also did Appleton rum. We also did a Russian vodka. We did Smint, which a lot of people don't know. We did Chupa Chups, lollipops, and we did the original Kombucha. So all of those brands were under the same umbrella, although my division was essentially Budweiser. And that only stopped about 3.5 years later when eventually the company that was importing the Budweiser shut down. Yeah.
Wow.
So it was a lot of fun. We had a racing car. I used to drive the Bud Mini, the little Mini Cooper, and I'd take 3 or 4 girls and we'd have to go stay in different towns and do big promotions. So that was my smaller elite group, and then I had a bigger group that would do all my in-store promotions. Yeah.
That's amazing. Were you doing martial arts at the same time?
Yeah. Not anymore at that point. So when I went to med school, I did at that point stop doing martial arts. Yeah. Mostly because my mom was a bit worried more about head injuries as I got older. And, I honored that. I thought she'd let me kind of keep doing the martial arts until I was about 18. And then at that point, I thought, it is a real concern. Yeah. I wouldn't want to get a head injury. I hadn't gotten any head injuries. Yeah. It's probably smart to pack it up when you have a black belt, pack it up when you're kind of at the top of, I'd been champion for 5 years running, stop at the top.
Okay, so then let's talk about the med school and different steps that you went to.
Yes.
Right?
So medical school in South Africa is also very different to North America. It's 3 years of academics, and then 3 years of practical. So it's a 6-year program. Yeah. There's no pre-med. The pre-med is kind of built in with the first 2 years of medical school. Yeah. But at least in the medical school that I grew up in, we had this mentality. It's see one, do one, teach one. You get shown something once, whether you're 2nd year, 3rd year, 4th year. Yeah. It's like somebody showed you how to do a catheter. The next one you're doing, and the 3rd one you're having to teach the next person, because we have to do everything ourselves. We have to do our own blood work. We have to, put in our own catheters, things like that. So everything is very hands-on.
Well, that's amazing, because then a doctor is very diverse in everything.
Yes, and even just to get to the end of med school, we'd have to deliver 40 babies ourselves. So by the time we finish med school, we're very experienced in doing a lot of things, a lot more than, I would say, like, let's say in Canada, they may just not be doing it all as much. Like, we had to have it signed off that you had to have done all of these practical things, You're
like a super doctor. You're a super doctor, right? Because 40, like, that's crazy.
But everybody had to have it. Like, you couldn't graduate if you didn't do your 40 deliveries. And if you didn't, you went back on times where you weren't supposed to be working or on your off time. Yeah. And you'd have to go work in the maternity ward and deliver more babies. Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, so they wanted to make sure that everybody was very skilled at doing these things. I mean, by the time I'd been out of med school for not even 4 months and I was an intern, I was the one doing the amputations in the surgery rotation, right? So you're expected to be able to handle a lot and do it fast. There's no time for you to waste and not figure out how to do things,
So Doc, what are some of your first practical memories that you were doing? were some of the ones that stand out? Like maybe the first time, like, oh, wow. Like,
I mean, there's many that stand out.
Yeah.
Probably my funnest ones are the ones that we call like front room thoracotomies.
Yeah.
So we have a very high rate of people being either stabbed in the heart or shot in the chest. There's a lot of gun violence. There's a lot of knife violence in South Africa.
that's serious.
And probably one of the, I don't say funniest, and this, I don't say that to sound cruel or anything, but we had a patient come in. He comes straight into emergency. It's a stab heart. He was being stabbed in the heart.
In the heart.
In the heart. So he's bleeding out of his heart.
You can get stabbed in the heart and survive?
Well, if we get to you quick enough.
Are you serious? I thought once you get a stab in the heart, you're finished.
You have a very short time period in which to get in, and so
what is the time span?
We used to cut them open in the emergency department, cut their chest open, stick your finger in their heart, and then now if you plug the hole, now we take him to the surgery to get him closed.
But you pull the knife and then, how does it work?
Yeah, so one of my memories is actually like sitting on the patient with my finger in his heart as they roll us off into the operating room, and you don't take your finger out until somebody's ready to stitch it closed, right? So and do that kind of thing. Yeah. So those are the kind of experiences we had. Yeah.
Oh wow, doc. How long do you have, like when a heart thing happens? When you have a stroke, how long do you have?
I guess it depends on how big the knife is.
Yeah.
Depends on whether it's still plugged in the hole or whether it's come out. It can be minutes. Obviously, we did have, when I worked at that hospital, we had a population of about 1.5 million people that all drained into this hospital. And it was very much in the middle of what we used to call the ganglands. So you never stopped at a traffic light. You would just drive straight through, especially as a female. I used to drive with my stethoscope hanging on my mirror so that like people could see I was a doctor. So I'm just going to the hospital so that I didn't get pulled over for not stopping at the lights, things like that, because it wouldn't be safe. I'd get hijacked or I could get kidnapped or anything. Every single door in the hospital and every partition door had actual security gates with keys, like the metal gates. So the front door, the door between, like where you sign in just to get into the waiting room, another door between emergency. Every entrance at emergency was a locked gate. So it was very unsafe. So we saw a lot of violent injuries and things there. Yes.
Did anybody try to do a kidnap attempt, or have you had?
No, I've had lots of patients try to attack me. But again, I was always comfortable with that. I had a psychiatric patient who kind of lunged at me. Again, luckily with my kickboxing training, first instinct was to kick him. So I kicked him, and then because the other patients were all there and they kind of grabbed him as soon as I kicked him, and they were able to hold him down. So I never got injured.
Oh my God, this is amazing. You know, I'm learning so much about you. You know, it's crazy. Like the depth of every human being is like insane. Like oh my God. So
and these are fun memories. These are not memories. I don't want to say I miss them not being in Africa, but it's a whole other way of being and a whole other life.
That is like I never heard anything like this before. Well, there is stuff like that where I come from, right? A lot of stuff like that. But I never thought, in a place in like South Africa, there'd be these kind of things, right? So,
unfortunately it is like that, I mean, when we worked in the hospital, we didn't always have blankets for people. We didn't always have enough food for people. There's cockroaches running on the floor. We used to tell patients, bring your own blankets. Get your family to bring you food, because we can't guarantee that there's always enough of everything.
So you have it pretty good here.
It is pretty good here. Yes, I remember working in the community clinic, and the patients would have to get there at about 5 a.m. in the morning to maybe get a spot for that day. We would start at 8 a.m. So they'd be waiting 3 hours, which meant they probably woke up at 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning to walk to get to the clinic. We would start at 8 a.m. There'd be 3 or 4 of us. So if you're the last guy in the line, you've been waiting since 5 a.m. and I might only get to you at 3 p.m. in the afternoon when it's your turn. Then you have to go wait at the lineup at the pharmacy, which might take you another hour and a half. And if you get to your turn and they've run out of medication, you just don't get any. Like you're diabetic, but you're the last guy for today and they don't have any medication left. You don't get any this week.
Wow.
You're going to come back again next week and hopefully they have by then. So that was the reality of medicine in South Africa. If you look at the public sector and you look at the poverty that was created by the apartheid, where these people were funneled into townships. They weren't allowed to work. They lived in extreme poverty, and with that came medicine that was also in poverty. You didn't always, you had to wait hours. You had to walk back home again in the dark. You didn't always get medicine, or if you did, it was just the basics. So they make them tough in Africa.
That's crazy. Wow. People don't know about these things, right? They think everywhere is like here. So Doc, so you finish your med school.
Yeah.
Did you close your businesses?
So then I closed my businesses. Part of that was also because when we finish med school in South Africa, we are expected to do an internship. And an internship is not a residency. This is 1 year. You're paid, let's say, 3/4 of a wage, and you have to do work in every single department in the hospital.
Yeah.
And you still have to get signed off, but you're the worker bee.
Yeah.
So, week 1, I'm on call. I'm the person that's, taking in the difficult cases from the smaller clinics. I'm the person that's like starting the surgeries or assisting the surgeries. You're actively working. But in that process, because you spend 2 months in every department, you're highly skilled by the end of it in every department. Whether it be surgery, whether it be psychiatry, whether it be medicine, we are fully experienced in every department by the time we're done. Yeah.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
So after that, did you start your own practice over there, or did you came to Canada?
No, I stayed in emergency medicine, which was my love. I loved the chaos. I loved that I came to work every day and I didn't know what I was going to get. Part of it was also, I didn't really worry, or I don't always take everybody's trauma home with me, right? So I was able to see something happen, but I was able to come back to work the next day and feel joyous and be happy to be there. So I knew that I was being there, I'm doing the most I can, and I was able to go home and relax and then be back the next day. So I loved emergency medicine. Did that for about 1.5 years, and then I moved to Canada. So just enough time to set up the applications to Canada, get the visas, all of those things. It takes a bit of time. Yeah.
So when you came to Canada, how did that go? Do you have to take classes again, or was it okay?
So firstly, I moved from big city emergency department, doing all kinds of crazy stuff, to a small town of 3,000 people.
Where was it?
Fort St. James, northern BC.
Oh God, it's so cold. So cold.
Right.
It's a nice place, but it's very cold.
It's very cold. So very much back into just kind of clinical work. We would do deliveries, all of those things. So as I was working, I had to do about 4 more large examinations, but they were all very scheduled. So you had to work for a certain amount of time before you were allowed to challenge the examination.
Yeah.
You had to pass in X number of tries. So you only get so many tries or you have to leave the country.
Are you serious?
I mean, I didn't have to try anything the second time. I passed each of my exams the first time.
You're so knowledgeable. They're teaching you it's crazy.
Yeah. But it was very kind of, you had to work for so you're working and then studying as well, but...
So they made you study again here?
So you would have to study the work again, because you have to study how the Canadians want you to present it, which is not how we do it in South Africa.
What's the difference?
South Africa is practical, where Canada is, they want you to be able to bring it very more structurally, and not, I don't want to say not as chaotic in Africa, but in Africa, it's not always step by step by step by step, because we don't necessarily have all the steps or the access to all the steps. The medicine that I was doing was different. I was doing emergency medicine. I was doing trauma medicine. When I moved here, I had to step back and go back to family medicine. So just going back to the nuances here, the way they do the examinations are different here. So I had to learn the style and the way they were going to ask the questions. So the studying was more in learning the Canadian style, not necessarily as much the actual information.
Okay, so when all of that happened, then what happened? You become what kind of a doctor here?
So when I'm here, I come in with, so my university degree was accepted here, so I came in, and then once you've done all of the examinations, and it takes about 5 years to do that.
5 years on top of the 6 years you've done over there.
Yeah, but I'm working the whole time.
Yeah.
So I'm allowed to work while I'm doing this. So then I get a Canadian degree. Yeah. So it's not so bad, because now I have 2 medical degrees. And I'm okay with that. I get to be a doctor.
Should I call you doctor?
Doctor.
Doctor Tracey. It's very hard for me to pronounce the R's.
So I was very proud to do that. Again, I think just out of my own experience of always working and studying, doing the studying and the working here, I didn't feel that it was too much of a challenge. I also did enjoy learning the expectation. When you're working in a small town and when you come to Canada, it's a big country. And people, they would say, oh, you already have a medical degree, you shouldn't have to redo these things. But I knew what was expected, so I could also feel reassured that if I'm going to have an accident in a small town, I know that doctor knows so much. And I could kind of judge on what the quality of the physicians would be, because you have to be able to get through these tests and examinations. So I had no problem doing it.
So when all of that finished, what happened after that?
Well, then you're just working. So then so in Canada, because they expect a residency, you all kind of, you streamline into family medicine. With family medicine, I was still delivering babies as well. I have a couple of crazy stories about that in Canada.
Let's talk about it.
Probably the most memorable, the first delivery in Canada, they call you, so you're at home, it's a small town, they call you and say, ladies, come in. And I'm like, okay, coming.
Did they call you in the middle of the night or did they call you in the day?
This was early evening.
Okay, good.
Early evenings, they'd say about 8 o'clock. I get there, I barely got my gloves on, come to bed, and I'm like trying to introduce myself, and the baby pops out. And it's like, you're like an instant hero, but you didn't do anything, So that was the first one. I remember I didn't technically do anything for the first one. The mom just delivered. Probably one of the last ones I did before I moved from Fort St. James was a very challenging case. The woman was only 28 weeks pregnant. She'd gone into labor. We only have one nurse working with us when we're on the night shift, or two nurses. There's no other doctor. So we have to call the ambulance. Children's Hospital won't come to Fort St. James. They'll only come to Vanderhoof. So you have to be able to drive them that 45 minutes to get them to a hospital that can kind of manage it. And we delivered about 4 or 5 minutes out of the hospital. And so I wrapped the baby up and I was basically, and had it ready. Mom was still lying in the ambulance. So we're in the ambulance, the baby's delivered. And I just remember we got to the hospital, they flung open the doors and I just ran through it. It was like a movie scene. You're running through the hallways and the nurses are pointing that way, that way, that way. And you've got this 28-week baby that should still spend another 3 months in the mom's belly that I'm running into. And then I got it there to the incubator and they had 2 doctors ready. And that baby survived and did very, very well. And, that was very memorable. Yeah.
That is amazing, though.
Yeah.
Oh. And then you moved to PG, right?
Then I moved to Prince George, started working emergency, but also stayed in family medicine.
How was the move from there to here? Like, was it like, it's a little bit bigger city?
It was nice. There's more restaurants. You get to drive a little further. There's some traffic lights. There's no traffic lights in Fort St. James. So it was just, for me, it was a good transition. I was used to big city and the small town was okay, but it was just a little bit more of something that I was used to. So it did feel better and having more access. Spent a number of years doing that. And then slowly just evolve myself, opened the walk-in clinic with another physician. That got busy from day one. And it was running.
So you opened your own clinic here?
Myself and another physician opened a walk-in clinic here,
How long did you do that for?
Well, till now, I still work there right now.
Are you talking about someone that I know? No, which one? There's that.
The one in the superstore.
Oh,
yes.
That's the one my mom goes
so that's ours.
Yeah,
yes.
She knows you.
Yeah, so we opened that in August 20... I'm trying to think when it was, 2013. Yeah, 10 years ago. Yeah. And basically the first day was the quietest day, which had about 60 patients. And ever since then, we see between 100 and 250 people a day.
A day?
Every day.
250 people a day?
If we can, if we have enough doctors, yeah.
How does it work? Like, you have to talk so much, and then you have to know everybody, then you have to be happy and excited. How does all that work? Like, 250 is a lot of people.
Well, I'm not seeing 250, so I might see 50 to 60 people a day.
Still,
yes.
You have to go and talk to everybody. Hi, how are you today?
Yeah.
If you're feeling good, but that to upkeep with that, like, how do you do it? Like,
it's very similar to being an emergency doctor, though. You're constantly having to be on your feet and readjust and take each moment and kind of work with it. So I have to. The other thing when you work like that as well is you have to be able to trust your instincts.
Yeah.
Every time I walk in a room, I don't know what I'm going to get, but I need to know that I'm going to be able to trust what I'm perceiving and the decision I'm going to make, and that I'm not going to leave that patient worse off.
Yeah.
And I may only have. It's not that I only have a few minutes. I can take an hour or two.
Yeah.
But the reality is, I have 100 people waiting in the waiting room. And there's a lot of pressure with that, right? And these people might have been waiting 2 hours by the time you see them, so they're frustrated.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to reassure them, you have to be able to hear what they want and make sure that when they leave that they're okay. Yeah.
That's where the psychology comes in, right?
I mean, one thing I can say is, I do have ADHD, and that's probably what helped me always manage with the stress that other people would see as very stressful. I was able to manage and kind of move from one thing to the next and not feel overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So did the last kind of 8 to 9 years, very heavy paced, walk-in clinic, also work emergency. I also do on-call, trying to raise 2 young kids. It's a busy life. But slowly in the last 4 or 5 years, I've evolved myself and kind of slowly moved into a newer stream of practice that I want to do more into the future, which is very different from what I was doing before, but it is somehow still just as important for the patients. So it's been a nice evolution.
Yeah. So Doc, let's talk about ADHD a little bit, because there's so many so many information out there, right? I guess even the person with the ADHD is confused because there's so much information, right?
It is, yes.
So I guess one of the benefit of ADHD is you can
compartmentalize.
Yeah, you can do that, right? You can have
some people can
100 different projects, and then every one of them is in a bubble.
So we can do 100 things. People will say that we do everything half-heartedly. I mean, I don't always agree with that, because I know that I was doing my medicine well and I was doing my business well. I was very successful in my business. I was able to plan to get to Canada, and then when I was here, I was working 3 different roles and doing multiple things. But not everybody with ADHD is as lucky. Some people get very overwhelmed. Some people get very non-functional because I talk about my squirrels. The squirrels that are running around in my head, and when they just run and run looking for nuts, it gets a little crazy, right? If I could get them running on a hamster wheel, it would be easier, but they're not always doing that. And some people get very overwhelmed with that.
How do you control it?
Physical exercise has always been my go-to, which is probably why the kickboxing was so helpful for me. I played kickboxing, I did field hockey, I played water polo, I played squash. So I always stayed busy. I have also tried to stay busy. Now I still train 3 times a week. I've just taken up water polo again. So physical exercise is a way for me to really kind of control it.
Are you still doing kickboxing?
I'm not. So I did take up judo again a few years ago, which I've never done before. So I thought I would try it as an adult. It's a branch off. It's something quite different, but it's still the martial arts. And I'm too competitive. Try to keep up with the boys, and ended up with a small fracture in my shoulder. And I thought, I probably shouldn't be doing these kind of things where I'm going to break things at my age. It's not helpful.
So Doc, what are some of the ways that people can deal with ADHD? Is there different type of ADHD?
There are,
So
and I mean, we also see that differently in boys and girls. So the ADHD in boys often tends to be, I don't want to say it's more chaotic. It's not chaotic. Boys in general are more higher energy and a bit more destructive. But then the ones with ADHD, it's really kind of to the extreme, where I can tell you with my ADHD, all I did was talk a lot. Talk a lot and talk a lot and talk a lot. Okay. I was the little kid that never stopped talking. And interestingly enough, my youngest daughter has ADHD, and she never stops talking.
I'll tell you something. I work with a lot of Italian designers. Italians
never stop
talking. It's crazy. You always have to listen. Like sometimes I try, where we do like design projects and things like that. I'm like, okay, we're gonna do it like this, and I try to get a word in when a designer starts. God help me, I just have to sit and just listen to everything and take notes.
So some of the time, I guess I'm not always paying as good attention to what other people are trying to convey as well, because my thoughts are so pressured. I want to talk so much. There have been times where I have been on medication. I was only diagnosed actually at the end of medical school. Although when you look at my childhood, it was obvious.
Yeah.
You know, always busy, always doing 100 things, always talking a lot. Yeah.
Some people will have ADHD, they shut down sometimes. Have you ever had that before happen?
And it can be very overwhelming. And
Because
now as an adult, I can say there are times where the squirrels running around and the disorganization that it can sometimes create does make you quite overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And that can be exhausting. Some people may suffer depression from that. I can tell you I've never felt depressed or suffered depression. I'm lucky to not have anxiety, but many people could become anxious from that. Because it feels disorganized and it feels chaotic and you feel overwhelmed, right? And then you become more disorganized, so more things pile up. And that's where we can see some people will battle with more mental health things on top of the ADHD. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So, what you do? So you you still have that clinic, right?
Yes.
Okay. But you're doing something else. You're working with a naturopath, another
Yes.
naturopathic doctor. Let's
Yes.
talk about that story because
Okay.
that's a very interesting story.
Yes. So met a wonderful man a couple of years ago, and he happens to be a naturopath. And I've always been very open to medicine. And I think because medicine isn't a job for me, it's more of who I am. It's not confined to the restraints of what modern medicine wants to create. It's like, you know, medical doctors and naturopathic doctors. So I've always been open to that. And, you know, we've been together now for years, and we're working together with our patients, actually, by giving them the care from both sides. And it's really, really been fun, and it's been interesting, and it's evolving because we're changing the medicine from, you know, just dealing with coughs and colds and having to worry about did you break your toe or not. And we're delving into more preventative medicine. We're delving into anti-aging. We're doing a lot more sexual health. We're doing sports performance. So these other aspects of life that people forget about are just as important. You know, you're 45, you want to feel good, you need to stay functional, you don't want to be tired all the time, but you want to make sure you don't get diabetes. You want your skin to look good. You want to keep your weight under control. All of these things are just as important as, you know, making sure you don't have a cold or a flu, you know, for longevity.
So how do you guys meet? Let's get to the... how did you guys meet each
How
other?
did we meet?
Because it's very rare.
Yes.
I never see... Well, maybe, I guess it's very rare. It's very hard to see a medical doctor
with a naturopath.
naturopath.
Yes.
He's very different, right? So let's talk about how you guys met and what happened. And
I'd had some cancer, and then after that I thought, you know what?
you had cancer?
I did. I had melanoma.
Oh, okay.
I had some surgeries and some skin grafting, and everything was clear. And then after that, I thought, you know what? I'm going to honor my body for being tough, and I'm going to do an Ironman. Now, I'd never done a triathlon, so I thought, go big or go home. Right? So we're going to do an Ironman. And in that training, I used to go for some IV vitamins and magnesium and things like that, just to keep my body topped up. So we knew each other like that, just as acquaintances. And then what happened is we both signed up for a cancer team. So a team that cycles and raises money for cancer. And because we both had very kind of mixed schedules compared to a lot of people who work very 9 to 5 and they were able to train together, our schedules were different. So we thought, okay, we'll start training together when we had gaps in our schedule. And we became friends that way, and months and months and months of training and a really great friendship and just a respect for each other's fields, right? And learning more about his field of medicine and how we worked and the science behind it and that kind of thing here. So, and that just eventually blossomed into a romance.
Wow. Yes. That is amazing. So what do you guys, now you guys work together now, right?
So we now have a clinic where we do a mixture of women and men's health, preventative medicine, sports optimization, and as well as something newer that I've added to this, which is kind of very much sexual health, keeping people healthier, and cosmetic gynecology. So it's a kind of a new age field to go into. We have that online and in person. So that we do together. Then we also work, we do individual work as well. Still, I work at the urgent care clinic where I've moved to now in Kelowna as well. I still work here at this clinic, and he does a lot of sports medicine and injury prevention and things like that. So that he does separately as well still, yeah.
He's a martial artist too, doesn't he?
Yes, he is, yeah.
So let's talk about some of the new practices you're doing. We have to be PG, right? So,
yes.
Yeah.
So we've left PG, but we're still here. We're still doing our clinic here 1 week of the month, and then we do it online. So in that we do, I don't want to say health optimization because that sounds very kind of nouveau, right? What we're doing is we're seeing patients, we're going, what do you need for your health? How do we keep you healthier? Whether you be 30 years old, 50 years old, 60 years old. How do we get you to 50, 60, 70 and not have you disease-ridden, not have you, broken down? Everybody's lifestyles are busy. People are eating bad, drinking bad. They're not staying busy, not moving their bodies. And there are so many things we can do to prevent disease. So we're trying to really let people learn how to prevent disease, support them in that, make sure we're doing all the correct testing. And then in patients who need what we would call optimization, right? So we want to make them stronger. How do they become more successful in what they're doing? How do we keep them healthier and keep their energy up? We're doing that as well, yes.
So doctor, what is the process? And then maybe after talk about what are some of the things that people can do for prevention, right? I know some people, they eat sugar all the time.
Yeah. And as someone with ADHD, I eat sugar a lot because the sugar or the stimulants actually helps keep my brain more focused. Yeah. But some of the things firstly are, of course, getting assessed, like getting some blood work done, things like that, where we would taking a history so we can see what things are going on in your life. We also have to consider some people will have genetic variations. So depending where you're coming from, different countries will have different diseases that they might be more at risk of. Yeah. So remembering that our Greek populations are different to our Eastern European populations, who are different to our Filipino population. They all have a different disease burden on them. And then once we've assessed you and gone, what do you need? Then we have to look at your goals. Like, what are you trying to achieve, and how can we make you understand what you should be achieving, right? We don't want you to become diabetic. We don't want you to have blood pressure. We don't want you to, get these negative things that are going to really weigh you down later on. So what can we do to prevent? But where are you in that? What can we do to motivate you and get you healthier? Yeah.
Let's talk about some of the prevention things that people can do. Some of the things they can prevent not to live a healthier life, right? So when they come to you, there is at least some basis of health.
Yes. What I'm going to probably say is I'm going to get you to get Jason to explain all of that when you interview him, because he's way better at describing all the prevention, because he does a lot more preventative medicine. Yeah. Medical doctors in Canada are not expected to teach people about preventative medicine. They're there to treat disease. Yeah. So if you don't have disease, I don't have a job. Right. So medicine in Canada it's disease-based. You need to be sick, and then I'm employed. Yeah. Which is different. With the naturopath, they're going, how do we prevent you from getting sick? Yeah. It's not always treatment. Yeah. So the medicine is very different. I've always tried to teach people prevention as well, basics, the stuff that I knew. Obviously now my knowledge is broadened with the naturopathic information that I use. We try and stick with science-based medicine as well. So everything we're going to use has to have good scientific evidence behind it. Yeah. And then slowly over this, I'm also trying to work on, I'm looking, I guess, at my own age group, and I'm going 40-year-olds to 65-year-olds to 70-year-olds. Yeah. We want to be healthier. Yeah. We want to live longer, and we want to maintain how we feel now as we turn 50, as we turn 60. Yeah. So how can I do that for my patients? I don't want to be 60 and feel frumpy and not have any energy and not have a libido and not feel good about myself and be connected with my partner. I know I don't want that. So what I've done is done more training. I've been to Europe. I've had specialized training there so that I can start working on those aspects and prevention for the patients so that they can stay feeling 40-ish as they become 50, as they become 60, because we need to maintain that energy. People are living longer, they're working longer, so we need to keep them productive.
So, Doc, where can people find you? And then you have a website, you have a thing?
Yes,
your
so our clinic is called Omnio Medical, and Omnio is Latin for kind of everything. And the idea behind it was, it's not everything specifically, but it meaning all kinds. And we're trying to show that when you come to our clinic, you're going to get all kinds of medicine. You're going to get both worlds mixed into one. Every patient, or most patients, will probably get both of us consulting. We're always consulting about all the patients together so that you're getting like all the information you can, even though you think you're only speaking to me. If it's something that I'm going, I need a little bit more insight, I'm going to chat, confidentially with Jason about the patient and go, hey, I've got this patient. What do I do? How do we maximize their health? How do we give them, the best advice, the best treatment? So you're really getting all aspects of health addressed when you see us.
Sure, perfect.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to share before we end it?
Yes, I do want patients to know as well that we're really doing a lot, that, or at least I'm really focusing as well on sexual health and cosmetic gynecology. So these are for the female patients. They'll see on the website, I have done a lot of specialized training for that. I will be doing more training. So let's not forget that we want to stay healthy with our partners as we age. And that's something we really want to focus on with our patients and provide a service which is very underserviced and not really spoken about.
That's very important because you know what? People, they don't talk about this stuff. It's kind of shunned from the society. If you don't have a good experience with your partner, then there's a kind of a separation.
It breaks down. It separates. When a partnership is strong, what happens is there's a positive environment at home. So you feel well, you're well connected to your partner, which means there's a positive influence on your children. So your children do better because they're surrounded by love and positivity. Your job is more successful because you're excited to go to work, you feel good. You are more likely to stay healthier. So it positively influences every aspect of your life, which is also then a big influence to your community. So if we can keep more workers feeling great, showing up for work, doing their job well, families are staying healthier and happier and more connected, we're going to have a better outcome for our entire community as we age and as we kind of in every aspect of it. And that's what we're trying to achieve as well.
So, Dr. Tracey, so you follow your passion, you made your dream. Why is it important to follow your passion and live your dream?
Because you only have one life.
Isn't that beautiful?
You only have one life. And I know not everybody in the world has been blessed to be able to have a passion. I see young people today and they don't know what they want to do. And I don't understand it because that was never me. I was very blessed to have been born, and by the time I was 6 years old, I knew what my passion was. And I'm living it 20 years later, and it's still my passion. But I know there are a lot of people, and probably most of the population, who doesn't get to experience that. It really makes a difference in life when you have a passion to strive towards, because everything becomes more exciting. Everything becomes another stepping stone. And as long as you keep evolving yourself and my passion hasn't changed. I want to be a doctor, but my medicine is slowly evolving into a new passion, and now I can pour myself into that. It's going to keep me young. It's going to keep me happy, and hopefully, it's going to give me the ability to be the best physician to my patients.
That's beautiful. Well, Doc, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Hopefully, have you again, and see you soon. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Northern BC Narrative on Location. Every individual that we brought to our show, you see that they're following their passion and they're happy and excited. So always live your dream, follow your heart, and never give up, because it can be hard, but you can make it if you never give up.